Hello, and welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast where we talk about myths, legends, and folk tales from India. I am your host, Narad Muni, and am a mythological character myself. I have the gift of eternal life and knowledge of the past, the present, and the future. By profession, I'm a traveling musician and a storyteller. So the way I'm doing my job is by podcast. In this episode, we are going to continue the story of Garuda. We began the story in the previous episode, and this is really part 2. So if you haven't heard the previous one, it might be a good idea to go back and hear it first. Regardless, here's a summary of the story so far. Kashyap, who was a Saptarishi, had performed some special yajna to help 2 of his many wives have the children that they wanted. The wives were Kadru and Vinita, and they were also sisters. Kadru got her wish, which was 1,000 snake babies, the Nags. And Vinita asked for 2 children, but due to a miscalculation on her part, she ended up with just 1. But her run of bad luck didn't stop there. She and her unborn son, Garuda, ended up becoming servants to Kadru and her Nags. And that was because she lost a bet. It was a bet over the color of a divine horse's tail. And Kadru and the Nags won that through deception. The only silver lining for Vinita was that when she returned home, Garuda was born. One glance at him and all her pessimism evaporated. That's where we shall continue the story today. Garuda was not like his older brother Arun. Arun, when he emerged from his eggshell, had a deformed lower half. He had gone on to become the sun god's charioteer. Garuda was very much like a bird. He had massive wings, a strong beak, and looked powerful. One thing the brothers had in common was that they had both learned some essential life skills, even before emerging from their eggshells. How to speak, how to read and write, and they both had even developed a worldview, despite not having been out in the world. Garuda had very strong views on slavery, that it was an evil, that it must be stopped, and not just because he and Vinita were personally impacted by it. But despite his personal feelings on slavery, he gave in to his mother's instructions. Because, like all children in ancient India, your parents' words were law. Unless you were Prahlad, I guess. But we have covered that before in episode 20. So, on this fine summer day, when Vinita asked Garuda to help her with the latest order from Kadru, Garuda readily agreed to help. Kadru wanted to take her children on a picnic. Unfortunately, it was not a simple walk in the park. Certainly not for Vinita and Garuda, because the picnic spot was on an island. Kadru said that she was generously inviting her sister/servant and nephew/servant to join her and her children. And while they were joining them on their picnic, because said sister and said nephew were also their servants, it meant they would transport them all to the island. "All right," grumbled Vinita. "We can row the boat, I guess. Where is it?" "Where's the island?" asked Garuda. Kadru said that the island was in the Indian Ocean, and as for the boat, they had no need for a boat. why did Vinitha and Garud think that they were invited? Kadru was going to take a cruise on her sister's shoulders. Yes, Vinitha would have to swim across the ocean, carrying Kadru on her shoulders. And if Vinitha was going to grumble about it, she could forget all about getting that holiday next Diwali. As for Nags, they would get to the island by Garud Airlines. When Garud protested that the Indonesian flag carrier airlines hadn't been invented because this was still ancient India, Kadru corrected him. Garud would have to carry his 1,000 cousins all over his body as he flew to the islands. And that's not all. He would have to provide in-flight meal service. 1,000 snakes crawling all over your body? Who would like that? Garud certainly didn't like it. And moreover, it was embarrassing that he would have to serve food to his natural food. Because, in case you didn't know, birds of prey like Garud eat snakes. Garud stopped and thought for a second. Yes, he had to follow Kadru's orders. But nothing said that his compliance couldn't be malicious. Garud enlarged himself because he could change his size at will. And as soon as the 1,000 Nags had boarded, and before they could even stow away their carry-on bags, he took off. Not like a plane, and not like a bird, but like a rocket. Much like the SpaceX Falcon rockets, which, by the way, is also named after a bird of prey. You can imagine what happens to cold-blooded creatures like snakes when they get too high in the atmosphere. The scorching heat from the sun made it very uncomfortable. Now, you know and I know that modern science tells us that this is not going to happen. It does get pretty cold pretty quickly as you go up in the air. But let's just pretend that physics was a little different in ancient India than it is today, and that, in fact, it did get real hot. After all, that's what happened to Icarus in Greek mythology and to Sampati, the vulture, in the Ramayana. Nags were getting toasted alive, and some of them began to jump off Garud's back and into the cool ocean below. Being snakes, they could swim easily enough, though they were definitely going to complain real loud to their mother. Though a few of the Nags dropped off, most of them stayed on Garud's back and kept getting burned. Kadru was distressed at seeing all this, as any mother might be. She desperately prayed to Indra for an intervention. Since Indra was the god of rain and lightning and thunder, it was easy enough for him to intervene. Quickly, a bunch of clouds appeared between Garud and the sun, which made Garud shrug and change his mind about burning up all his cousins. Not that he wasn't ready to fight his way through, but it's just that he decided that his mother and Kadru were probably waiting too long, wondering why flying to the island was taking longer than swimming to it. So Garud took his cousins to the island. But he did ask his cousins on the way how Garud and Vinitha could be freed of this forced servitude. It took a while for the Nags to shake out of the terror of their near-death experience. But seeing as the person asking them the question was the very person who had caused the terror and near-death experience, It galvanized them into a quick answer. Lord Garud, sir, they addressed him, when they explained that only Kadru could release Vinita and Garud. The obvious follow-up question was what would make Kadru agree to something like that. Amrit, said all the Nags in unison. They explained that Kadru had been wanting the Nags to drink the nectar of immortality. If Garud fetched Amrit for the Nags, he and Vinita would be free. Amrit, Garud recalled, was the same thing that came out of the churning of the ocean, back in episode 51. And he knew that it must be kept in Swarg. So there was only one thing to do, to go to Swarg and get the Amrit. Now, if you're asking how Garud could just walk into Swarg and take the Amrit with him, we'll need to talk about your expectations. Also, Garud wouldn't be walking into Swarg. He'd need to fly, because Swarg, or heaven, is obviously up in the sky. Somewhere. I can't tell you the exact location, of course. Indra has strictly warned me not to. He doesn't like door-to-door salespeople visiting him, and he would like to keep the location a secret. Anyway, if Swarg is in the sky, you cannot keep it a secret from a creature of the sky, like Garud. At least, not for long. So Garud began his search. He enlarged himself to the size of a mountain, so it would be easy to spot Swarg from a distance. On top of that, being eagle-eyed, he noticed his father praying, thousands of kilometers away in the Himalayas. Kashyap was just the person Garud was searching for. Seeing as Kashyap was also the father of the Devas, he must have his children's address. Surely he must have visited Indra. And he had. Kashyap knew exactly where Swarg was, and he could easily direct Garud there. But first he had something very important to tell his son. Could it be that Kashyap was struggling with the situation of helping his youngest child fight a bunch of his other children to make his 1,000 other snake children immortal? No, that's not it. What Kashyap had on his mind was food. He explained that the larger you were, the more energy you burned, and the more sustenance you needed. Very much as the Ant-Man discovered in the Marvel movies. This is the first time you're visiting me. You should definitely have a bite to eat, Kashyap told his son. But instead of placing a fruit bowl on the table, or offering him tea and biscuits, Kashyap pointed towards a valley. Garud looked in that direction, and instantly his mouth watered. An elephant and a massive turtle were fighting. These two creatures were each about the size of a house, easily. And yet, Garud had no problem swooping down and grabbing each in his claws and carrying them off. Garud did eat both of them up, but it's a little gory, so I'll skip the details. After that little snack break, Garud was ready to follow the directions he had gotten from Kashyap. He zoomed off, eager to get the Amrit before going and finding lunch. Because honestly, the elephant and turtle were great. But they were more in the appetizers category. After having been in close proximity to his cousins for so long, he really felt like eating snakes. He wouldn't eat his cousins. Maybe. Okay, he might eat them as a last resort. but he would look everywhere else first. He stormed through the gates of Swarg. The Devs were shocked at being under attack. What happened to the state-of-the-art surveillance system, the electric fence, and the turrets with the automated machine guns? Only later they would realize that those were non-functional because someone had accidentally tripped over the main power cord and they had come unplugged. Honestly, if I hadn't been nursing my bruised elbow, I would have taken the extra 2 seconds to plug everything back in. Who leaves a cord out like that anyway, where anyone could trip over it? Anyway, back to the Devs. They launched their attack on this giant bird intruder. They kept shooting one weapon after another at the huge shape that was hovering over them. But nothing, not Indra's lightning, not arrows, spears, or any other weapon made any difference. When they realized that their weapons were not helping, some Devs began to panic. Soon, all Devs began to panic when Garuda flapped his massive wings. Because those wings were so strong, they kicked up an intense dust storm. None of the Devs could see anything. Vayu, the god of wind, had to intervene to clear the dust. But that didn't help very much, as Garuda again swept his wings and sent Devs scattering in every direction. The Devs must have felt sort of how Sinbad the sailor felt when he was trying to save himself from the giant rock on one of his 7 voyages. I mean, Sinbad's 7 voyages, not the rocks. Garuda didn't have to do that for long, because his eagle eyes quickly spotted what he had come for. An enormous golden pot at the center of several spinning discs that had sharp blades. The blades seemed so sharp that they could have sliced through diamond like it was butter. And coiling around the pot of Amrit was exactly what Garuda really wanted. Lunch. There were 2 huge snakes, spitting and hissing in his direction, ready to strike him should he somehow get past the spinning blades. Garuda did get past the spinning blades by going right through them. He shrunk himself to such a small size that he could pass through all the empty space in the atoms that the blades were made of. And he could do it without violating any laws. If you don't believe me, just go ask some specialists in quantum mechanics. Garuda got to the center and sprung back to his original size. This allowed him to quickly grab both snakes by his beak. And it had the side effect of smashing the spinning discs. Garuda loved the snakes. They were very tasty, though he felt the green snake would have been even better with some chutney. With his stomach fully satisfied, Garuda grabbed the pot of Amrit and flew off, unchallenged. Vishnu is one of the Holy Trinity. He is the preserver of the universe, just like Brahma is the creator and Shiva the destroyer. Vishnu was watching all this and was incredibly impressed by Garuda's strength and powers. But most of all, what impressed Vishnu was Garuda's selflessness. Despite having the entire pot of Amrit, he hadn't helped himself to a single drop of it. He also wasn't the conquering person who was going to assume the title of ruler of Swarg or something. All he wanted was to save his mother from servitude. and himself as well, but by extension. So Vishnu met Garud mid-flight and made him a very generous job offer, which Garud accepted immediately because it's not every day that the preserver of the universe asks you to be his mode of transport. Sure, his brother Arun had secured a pretty decent job as charioteer for the sun god, but Garud would be carrying Vishnu himself, the one and only Vishnu. Garud would get to go everywhere Vishnu went, and he could do his bit to help preserve the universe. He was looking forward to seeing Arun's face at the next family get together when Garud would announce the sweet gig that he had landed. Garud confirmed that he would report to duty tomorrow. And he also promised to be friends with Seshnag, the ultimate snake and Vishnu's constant companion. First, he had to finish the job. And so, Garud flew off towards the island where the Nags were waiting. But there was another interruption. Indra himself appeared. Yes, the very Indra who had tried with all his might and all the might of all the other Devs to battle Garud. Indra had failed. He clearly accepted that Garud was stronger. What Indra had to offer now was friendship. Indra figured that if you can't beat them, join them. Garud was more than willing to be friends and to let bygones be bygones. Then, said Indra, as a friend to another friend, please give me back my Amrit. Well, that was something Garud could not do, and he said so. He needed the Amrit to free his mom and himself. They brainstormed a bit until finally they hit on a plan. Their plan was a little smarter than a Bollywood plot. They didn't just prepare a pot with fake Amrit. Kadru and the Nags knew that the Amrit pot had a tamper-proof seal and a certificate of authenticity. Garud took the pot straight to the Nags, while Indra returned to Swarg. Indra hadn't given up. He instead had returned to fetch his son, Jayant, to do him a little favor. Garud, meanwhile, presented the pot to the Nags and Kadru. The snakes were eager to dive in, but Garud stopped them. First, Kadru had to lift the curse, which she gladly did. Vinita almost jumped for joy. But Garud had something else in mind too. He asked the Nags if they had even bothered to read the instructions on the Amrit. See, it clearly said on the warning label that they must bathe for at least half an hour before consuming Amrit. Oh, there was no warning label. Maybe it had fallen off somewhere. But the Nags should totally take Garud's word for it, or bad things would happen. That made sense to the Nags, so all 1,000 of them slithered off to the pond for a long bath. Kadru kept Vinita and Garud engaged in conversation as they waited. She obviously didn't want either of them to pull any funny business while the Nags were gone. But funny business is exactly what happened, as Kadru, Vinita and Garud went on a little stroll. Jayant, Indra's son, had sneaked in through the window of their shelter. He grabbed the pot and flew back to Swarg. The Nags, when they came back, were annoyed, upset, and angry at being cheated out of their Amrit. But they could not blame Garud or Vinita for it. Garud simply shook his head and suggested that they invest in some good CCTV cameras to at least identify the culprits if it were to happen again. With that, Garud took Vinita and flew off the island, leaving Kadru without a boat, without a mode of transport, without any servants, and they were still mortal. That's where we'll end it this week. Garud Airlines is a real thing. It's the Indonesian flag carrier airlines. Garud also features prominently in sculptures, not just in India, but in Japan and Cambodia, and many other countries in Asia. Jayant also features in a very interesting story in the Ramayana. We'll cover that in a future episode. Next week, we'll do a folktale from Himachal Pradesh. It's a revenge story featuring an evil stepmother, a dark forest, a tiger who is picky about what it eats, and a king who isn't picky about whom he marries. If you have comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories you would like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com or tweet at sfipodcast. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.